The day Mira refused to carry the water, the river rose without warning and swallowed the bridge. No storm, no rain, no wind strong enough to explain it. By evening, the crossing that had stood for generations was gone. They said Mira's shadow touched the water and angered it. They said a wife who neglects her duties invites disaster. They said the river answers to order, and she broke it. So they called her cursed. But no one asked how many years Mira's back had bent before that morning. No one counted how many times she crossed that same bridge before sunrise while others still slept. No one noticed how long she had been drowning, long before the river ever rose. Mira was not born into comfort, but marriage sealed her into hardship. She entered her husband's home with nothing but a small bundle of clothes and the promise that hard work would earn her belonging. Instead, she inherited debts she did not create and expectations she could never fully satisfy. Before the first rooster announced the morning, she was already awake. Before the sky softened into light, she had swept the yard, rekindled the fire, and begun the long walk to the river. She carried water. She carried firewood. She carried heavy baskets from the farm. She carried produce to the market under a sun that showed no mercy. And when night came, long after others had eaten and slept, she was still washing, still mending, still preparing for another dawn. There was no praise, only correction. Her husband rarely looked at her long enough to notice the swelling in her hands. His words were shaped by whichever voice reached him last, and his mother's voice was always the loudest, sharp, watchful, measuring Mira's worth by how silently she endured. In that household, responsibility had only one direction. Every burden had her name on it. She did not shout. She did not protest. She did not defend herself when blamed for what she did not cause. But silence is not the same as strength. And though her lips remained closed, something inside her was beginning to crack. The day everything shifted did not begin differently from the others, but it demanded more. The harvest had been poor. Money was short. Tempers were thinner than usual, so the loads grew heavier. Mira carried 3 water pots instead of 1. She balanced firewood high above her head and tied bundles against her back. She made 2 trips to the farm before midday, and still it was not enough. When she returned, breath unsteady, her husband stood in the doorway. He did not see effort. He saw delay. He called her slow. He called her careless. He asked what she did all day if the work was never finished. His mother did not lower her voice. She reminded Mira, in front of neighbors passing by, that a wife who cannot fill a house with children must at least fill it with usefulness. She said, "Emptiness follows a barren woman like a shadow." The neighbors did not defend her. They whispered that perhaps the house lacked laughter because of her. Perhaps misfortune had entered with her footsteps. The words clung heavier than the wood on her back. By late afternoon, she walked to the river again, the path blurring beneath her tired eyes. She bent to lift the water, and her body refused. The pot slipped from her hands. Her knees struck the earth. The world tilted, then darkened. Lying by the riverbank, too weak to rise, she did not ask for revenge. She did not ask for punishment. She whispered only this: "If no one will help me carry this life, let something take it from me." It was not a curse. It was exhaustion speaking. But the river was listening, and something beneath its quiet surface stirred. When Mira awoke the next morning, the first thing she noticed was how quiet the house felt. The water pots were full. The firewood stacked neatly beside the hearth. The farm, which she had left overrun with weeds, now appeared orderly, as if someone had walked through it under the cover of night. Even the baskets on her back felt lighter than the day before, as though unseen hands had shifted the weight. Confusion pressed against her chest. She could not explain it. Nothing in her world moved this way without sweat, without effort, and yet the household was pleased. Her husband smiled faintly and said, "You see, when you try harder, things improve." Her mother-in-law nodded, satisfied, claiming it as proof of Mira's diligence. No one paused to wonder why the work had been done before the sun even rose. No one asked whose hands had truly carried the burden. Mira felt a cold unease in her chest. Something had answered her whispered plea. Something unseen had stepped in, and while the help made life easier, a shadow of doubt crept over her heart. At what cost did relief come? Days passed, and the ease that had come overnight began to feel strange. Mira noticed her shadow lingering behind her longer than it should, stretching in odd angles as if reluctant to follow. At night, soft footsteps echoed through the empty corridors. Though no one walked there, she would wake, heart pounding, and find only the dim moonlight spilling across the floor. The chickens, once eager to scratch in the yard, now hesitated at the gate, pecking nervously before retreating. And the river that had always been clear and gentle, ran darker each dawn, almost black, as if it carried secrets beneath its surface. Her mother-in-law's voice sharpened, trembling between accusation and fear. "Witchcraft," she spat. "You use forces no woman should command." Mira said nothing, but the warning reached her ears. The village elder, a man who measured life by wisdom and observation, came to the house one evening. His eyes were steady, but his words carried weight. "Nothing carries a burden for free," he said. "Every gift demands repayment. Even the unseen does not work without balance." Mira felt the words settle into her chest. The help she had received, was it a blessing, or was it something else, waiting to collect its due? And for the first time, she wondered if the relief she had welcomed so eagerly might have a cost far greater than she could bear. At midnight, Mira could no longer ignore the stirrings in the house. She rose quietly and crept toward the courtyard. That was when she saw it. A figure, silent and unbroken by moonlight, moved with careful purpose. It carried her water. It carried her firewood. It carried the weight of her exhaustion, her long years of toil, her invisible suffering. Mira's breath caught. She could not look away. And then it spoke. "You asked to be relieved," the voice murmured, low and steady. "I carry what you cannot." Relief washed over her, brief and fragile, but the figure's voice dropped, heavier this time. "When I finish carrying your burdens, I will carry you." Mira's heart, Francie. The help that had seemed a blessing was no longer simple. The weight it bore for her had a price that might be more than her life could pay. And in that silent courtyard, Mira understood. She had invited a force she could neither control nor refuse. In the days that followed, the balance Mira had known began to crumble. Her husband grew more demanding, expecting perfection without pause. Her mother-in-law piled task upon task, as if testing the limits of her endurance. Even the neighbors, seeing her hands free of strain, brought extra baskets and chores, smiling at her ease. And Mira, she never struggled. But the relief that had once felt like a gift now pressed against her like a weight she could not lift. The spirit she had unwittingly called upon moved through the house each night, stronger with every load. Mira, in turn, grew weaker. She caught her reflection in the river one evening. It was faint, blurred, a shadow of herself staring back, and the voice came again, low and certain. "The heavier they make it, the sooner I am done." Her chest tightened with understanding. The hands she had welcomed were not merely helping. They were racing her toward an end she had never imagined, and every demand, every expectation, every borrowed burden was pushing her closer. Mira stood at the edge of the courtyard, heart-hammering, the weight of every unseen hand pressing down on her. She faced a choice: to carry on silently, as she had for years, and disappear beneath the burdens she bore, or to speak, to expose the truth, and risk scorn, anger, perhaps even rejection. Her hands trembled as she lifted the water pot one final time. Then, with a force she did not know she possessed, she let it drop. The heavy clatter echoed through the yard, breaking the hush of daily chores. "I will lift no more," she declared, voice shaking but steady. "I will carry nothing that is not mine." The neighbors, Francie. The mother-in-law's lips parted in shock. Her husband's eyes widened. Mira stood, chest heaving, and laid bare the injustice she had endured for years. She spoke of the endless loads, the nights without rest, the years without acknowledgement, she admitted. Finally, the whispered plea she had made, a plea that something beyond her had answered. Silence fell like a heavy curtain, and then, behind her, a presence, the spirit she had called, the one who had carried her pain, stood there, visible only to her. It waited, patient and unwavering, as though it had been counting the days until this moment. Mira swallowed hard. For the first time, she was no longer certain if relief was mercy or judgment. The household stood in stunned silence. Her husband's eyes softened as he finally saw what Mira had carried, year after year. In silence, the elder's voice rang through the yard, firm and unyielding. No one should bear all burdens alone. Neighbors lowered their heads in shame. Hands that had never lifted now reached to help. The baskets were shared, the firewood divided, the water carried together. The spirit Mira had feared simply faded, as if it had been waiting for balance to return. And Mira understood, finally, that a burden shared cannot summon it. The weight on her back lifted, but more importantly, she was seen, no longer invisible, no longer alone. Her words met only laughter. Mockery echoed in the courtyard. They called her mad. They refused to change. That night, under the cold moonlight, the spirit moved with quiet certainty. It finished carrying what Mira had entrusted to it. By morning, Mira was gone. The water remained uncarried, the firewood untouched, the farm lay in weeds. Every burden in that house had doubled, heavier than ever, and no one could lift them. The lesson, harsh and inescapable, whispered through the walls. Some burdens cannot be ignored, and some help comes with a price no one can pay. Sometimes the heaviest loads are not on the head, but in the heart. Pause. When someone carries everything alone, it is only a matter of time before something breaks. And now, think carefully. If you were in her place, would you have stayed silent or walked away? If this story stirred something in you, subscribe for more powerful tales that reveal what silence often hides. And tell me in the comments, was she patient or pushed too far?